will also be our last meeting of the year. You'll all please stand for a moment of silence. So Yank, if you'll lead us off.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, if you'll please do roll call.
Councillor Davis? Here. Councillor Yank?
Here.
Councillor Bobby?
Here.
Councillor Cormier?
Here.
Councillor Warner?
Here.
Vice Mayor Kojin?
Here.
Mayor Tappan?
Here. Number 5, priorities list 1. Is there any discussion on the council's strategic priorities? Okay, I'd like to just mention under the quality of life, I'd really like to thank the city manager and all the staff involved in the parade of lights and the trees and that Saturday night's home for the holidays. I got lots of compliments on that, so I thank you for that and all the staff that was involved in that. Any discussion on individual priorities? Okay, moving on to minutes.
We prefer the minutes. Second.
Motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Consent agenda. There's nothing on today's consent agenda, so we'll move on. Next item that we have business is hearing from the citizens. This is for any non-agendized items. However, the city cannot take legal action on any matters during this time. Is anyone that would like to speak during the hearing for the citizens? Okay, well, moving on to unfinished business. 10.1, discussion and possible action by City Council pertaining to airport lease for Lake Powell Car Rentals, LLC, Resolution 1221-18. Josh. Secretary, please introduce.
A resolution of the Mayor and City Council of the City of Page, Coconino County, Arizona, terminating the current lease with Lake Powell Car Rental Companies and approving a new lease of certain real property owned by the City of Page pursuant to a negotiated lease with Lake Powell Car Rental Companies, LLC, and authorizing the Mayor to execute said lease agreement.
This is a lease agreement with Avis. They've asked to move over to the space that Sundance Helicopters vacated. Provides them with a little more room and a better location, a little less crowded as far as the desk there, front desk with contour. For the most part, it's the same terms of the current lease that he has at the with the counter space that he has currently. The one difference is that we did discuss concerns with congestion of parking in the main terminal parking area. And presently, Avis has 10 kind of exclusive parking spaces in that lot that are signed for Avis only. And then they have 10 spaces over by the Jet Center. So it's a total of 20 signed spaces, and then they have other vehicles just depending on what they have going on. They'll have additional vehicles parked in the main terminal and or over by the Jet Center. So what we talked about with the business was that we would reduce the number, we would reduce all of the signed exclusive spaces in the main terminal, so it'll open up 10 spaces, but that they could still use up to 5 spots on a day use. So, you know, if they had somebody coming in there or dropping off a car and it was going to get, they could just leave it there, type of a thing. So it should free up several spaces in the main terminal parking area. And then they're going to have a total of 20 signed spaces over in the old terminal parking area. Otherwise, it was advertised for 2 weeks and we didn't receive any comments.
Mayor, I think that covers what we addressed in our last meeting, so I'd move to adopt resolution number 1221-18.
Second.
Motion, multiple seconds. Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item of business, 10.2, discussion and possible action by City Council pertaining to proposed published fees for Horseshoe Bend. So in order for us to start charging in April, we need to get fees published. So we need to get them published start getting them published this month to get those in place by April. So this is an item to get approval from council to get those published, and it's kind of the fees that we had talked about a couple months ago. Councilor Warner, did you want to add any to that on?
Me?
Councilor Warner.
Mayor, Council, this is as a result of, this has been in the makings for a little over 2 years. So we've come to that pass and that time frame now that we need to act on this moving forward. But we've been meeting in a subcommittee with council members Warner and Cormier, and as a result of many discussions just during in my time in the 5 months, this subcommittee has been fully discussing the fees. So with that, I'll defer to the council member Warner for a little bit more details as to what those fees are about.
Thanks, Mike. Before you is a sort of a brief spreadsheet that will identify 4 options for discussion. Back in July, we had discussed a fee rate structure of $10 a passenger car, $50 for a commercial vehicle, and $100 for a full-sized bus. In drafting some forecast models that sort of allow a sneak preview of what the future may hold at Horseshoe Bend, it appears these percentages are there for us to look at and sort of evaluate what is our best position to take in terms of our beginning fee structure. One of the things that I think we want to try to avoid is an adjustment of fees. I think we need to try to hit the mark as close as we can, because a readjustment of a fee will require another 60 days. So we're at the point where tonight we pick a structure, and that's the model we're going to use in April. And if it's too low, then we're going to have to make an adjustment. And if it's too high, we'd probably make an adjustment too if we're losing traffic. So anyway, let me go through and explain with you what this is. So the first options are, you see I've broken the categories down into 5 classes. I know that we talked originally about 3 classes: passenger cars, all commercial, and then full-size buses. And talking with some of the tour operators out there, there's a fair amount of boutique tours that are going on a daily basis at Horseshoe Bend. It's a sizable amount of participation, and these boutique tours are typically 10-passenger vans or 12-passenger vans. So I thought maybe we should capture that as a category, because it may be unfair to charge them the same rate as a 20-passenger mid-size bus. However, it may be that we're losing revenue if we downsize on the mid-size bus to accommodate a blend of both. So the first option shows that with the assumption that there's 40 visitors per full-size bus and 20 on a mid-size bus, 10 in a commercial vehicle, boutique van, two per passenger cars. You can see that our first cost shows about a per person cost of $5. Then when you get up to the mid-size bus, the per person cost goes down to $2.50, and in a full-size bus, the per person cost goes down to $2.50. Below that, on each one of these scenarios, the collective revenue is essentially 100% on all of them. The big unknown here is how do we interact with the park, and what is their fee schedule going to look like? Because it has a dramatic effect on our recapture capabilities, and not so much going forward. I think going forward it simplifies, but in the first 5 to 7 year period when we're recapturing our capital investments, we've got a sizable outlay that we have to recover in terms of recapturing that investment. So maybe I should explain a little bit about the capital cost. So what we've looked at, it seems feasible, is that we would structure the investment at Horseshoe Bend. Horseshoe Bend would be structured in a special revenue fund. So that special revenue fund is more similar to a business operation, whereby you don't have as much of complexity when it comes to auditing. You can run it more of a business. So what happens is you have your income and you have your expenses, you have your fund balance, and you can amortize loans. It carries its own balance sheet. So basically you'd have a loan. Let's say we want to recapture our $2.7 million parking lot. That would be a loan from the general fund to Horseshoe Bend Revenue Fund. And all of these numbers illustrate a loan structure of 5-year terms and 6% interest. So the Horseshoe Bend Fund would pay the general fund for that loan. And so what I've done is I've capitalized all of the investments. We have about $3.8 million of investment that's already been made out at Horseshoe, appropriated and expended at Horseshoe Bend. So in going forward in the first year, Horseshoe Bend would start paying the general fund interest and principal on the loans that it's moved over. So it's actually benefiting the general fund by putting facilities in there. So what this shows you is if we were to go into option 1 on the left column where it says 20%, that's assuming that the park would take a 20% fee. So if we have a passenger car fee of $10, they'd get $2, and so far up. With that scenario on a 7-year forecast, I picked 7 years because to maintain a positive cash flow in the fund going forward and amortizing the 5-year loans and paying those off to the general fund, to keep a positive cash flow, you need a 7-year term. Okay, after 7 years, you've paid all of your capital expenditures, and that's like $8.8 million. So that's why I picked a 7-year forecast. Then I picked a 10-year forecast under that, just so that you could see that things really lighten up after you've satisfied your debt. So with the first option, using a 20% fee base for the Park Service, they have said that they're going to not charge us any fees for the first 2 years. So that's why their fee split is 20%, but net revenue after 7 year, net gain after 7 years is 14.6%. Our operations cost under this scenario with this revenue stream is 39%. We have a recapture investment of 37%. So after 7 years, our gain would be 8.7% of the total revenue. And the total revenue I projected out using today's visitation with a 5% reduction in 2019 and then a 2% positive growth thereafter. So a first year hit and then more stable after that. So then you come down and you can see under the 10-year forecast model, you can see that our net after gain is 20%. If the park takes 30, it's 12, and so it kind of that explains the idea here. The sweet spot, if you will, where after 7 years we've been made whole, and we're as close to what the park is in terms of their fee net gain. In other words, if you try to pick the point in these options, that where are we about equal? And that happens to be under option 4, 20%. I call it 4A. If you see under option 4, the net gain after recapture for the city is 15%. The net gain for the park is 14.6%. That one scenario comes closest to equity. Whether that matters or not, I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that out. Then, after we've been made whole, after 7 years and all of the projects built out, it would be likely that the fee structure would be revisited and possibly readjusted so that going forward there's a commonality and equity in terms of how much the city is receiving, how much the park's receiving. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. I mean, as far as an asset for the city, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to provide for a first-class, world-class facility, and at the same time become whole in a relatively short period of time. The thing I want to emphasize is that a lot of what we've done at Horseshoe Bend has already been appropriated, already been spent. So going forward, we're getting back that money we invested. So it's not draining the city any longer. We pretty much put the front money in. As we go forward and we look at these from year to year, it maintains a positive balance. It also maintains a positive payback schedule to the general fund. If we are to extend utilities, it would be likely that we would work out a loan process with PUE whereby it would pay back. And there's a significant amount of interest that's included in this amortization. So it's not like it's just taking money out of the general fund and throwing it in the street. This is investing in a business that's paying a return. Thank you. But we got to pick a number.
Remember, I prefer option 1 for a number of reasons. One, that we put that out there months ago, that those rates. Also, that one that we're adding in there, the 10 passenger commercial. Those people are charging anywhere from $40 to $80 a person to take them out there. You know, whereas the other 2 buses, they're doing that on the side as a part of their group tour thing, incorporated all in places. You know, they're not charging people that much extra just to go out to Horseshoe Bend.
I guess I like option 1 as well, but is there any way that we can consider like a locals discount, or
What?
or the people who live here who are used to being able to
No,
go
I
out there?
don't believe so. Just like if we had parking meters on the main street, if you could take up that space, you pay for it. That's my opinion, because we can do $3 million worth of improvements out there. It needs to be paid for. If you're local, they would tie up the line, and it would be a pretty nightmare for us to try to figure out who's local and who's not local.
For
Like the
people who
people
are
that wanna-
local, all they would have to do is show their ID, and it would have a local PO box.
Yeah, and then you got to have another fee, and then you got to keep track of that. And,
We
you know,
have different fees
the facilities
for
are
buses as
improvement,
well.
and then we should pay for them like everybody else. Nobody goes out there that much that $10 a car is going to hurt them.
I think Horseshoe Bend has become more of a place to take relatives, a place when a friend comes to visit to go look at. But as far as a leisurely walk anymore for the locals, I don't think they're using it that far. It's a pretty congested area. I kind of agree. I think you get into a whole abundance of complexity when you begin to have free pass here, free pass there. For the fee station operator, it becomes almost impossible. We ran into that just in our transfer station. We offered, so much free if you're local. Well, everybody had a utility bill. I mean, we had utility bills from people living in Kanab. It's easy. So how do you get that? And I'm agreeing with John. It's a $10 fee. We've got an investment, and I mean, maybe when we get this up and operating and we see how it works and it's going, then perhaps at the end of the year, and we see how the process is going with the fee booths and all that, perhaps an annual pass of some site that you buy, like you'd buy an annual pass at the park. You buy an annual pass for a discounted rate, that's fine. But to just let people in for free, I think you're just opening up a can of worms.
I mean, I don't see the big issue with it, just because if we just said, hey, you need an ID for locals, and if they wanted to bring their kids, which would be kids under like 12 or something, that would be fine. Or, I mean, there's a precedence for it with other places.
What's an ID? How do I know your ID? What's your ID?
There
How do you
could be
prove
a
residence in
school
Page?
ID, Page High School ID.
What about a guy that lives in Warwick?
Then they would have a P.O. box here with an ID and a P.O. box. And if they didn't have an ID with a P.O. box, then they wouldn't be able to get in free. I mean, for me, it's a little bit different because I'm half Navajo, but since I'm half Navajo, I can go out to Antelope Canyon, and I would pay the Navajo entrance fee, but then I don't have to pay the tour fee for it. So I pay $8 to get in on a Lower Antelope Canyon tour, and they're able to do it just fine.
Well, one of the things we can talk about is this is about the fees. This isn't about passes. This isn't about who gets in, who doesn't get in. This is about strictly the fees. If you want to have that discussion in 3 months, we can have that discussion. Tonight, we need to decide on the fees.
I was going to say the purpose of this is to make our deadline on the
Publishing.
of giving proper publishing notice of what we're going to charge for a bus, a car, and a van, motorcycle, whatever. That's the purpose of tonight. Digging deeper in the weeds on a local annual pass is kind of a separate issue. I think we would take up as maybe a one issue, even a work session, whatever, to dig deep into that and see how we could do that and make it justifiable. This kind of reminds me of when they opened the fee booths up at Warwick initially, what the local reaction was. Now I got to pay to go down to the lake. Well, it was a big issue then. But they've got millions of dollars tied up in their infrastructure there. We have millions of dollars tied up in Horseshoe Bend. We need to retrieve. But for tonight, I think we just need to pick a fee that works best for what we're going to publish, and maybe carry this forward to a January 5 thing we're going to do. I don't know, because we have 2 hours slotted for Horseshoe Bend on January 5. So.
Yeah, and that discussion won't affect the fee structure itself. I mean, the fee structure is for identifying those categories of whether it's a passenger car or commercial van or a bus. That's what this is for tonight, and we need to delay that other discussion for another time.
So I agree, Councilor Davis, we need to have further discussion on that. But this is, for this agenda item today, this is we're going to publish the fees for the commercial fees.
Mr. Mayor, I move to authorize staff to publish proposed fees for Horseshoe Bend using option 1.
I'd like to have a little bit more discussion.
Yeah,
on
I'd like to
option.
have a little more discussion before we get a second.
Councilor Warner, real quick question for you. Excuse me. And I'm for option 4, and let me explain why. Because it is the only fee schedule that has the same visitor dollar amount. Was there any discussion for other options giving the same visitor dollar amount to everybody?
So originally the idea was $250 a person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting that you put $5 for the car because we always envisioned a four passenger car, so that'd be a $250 per person, also under the car.
Yeah, I wanted to point that out. It's a good point, Levi, that you could argue that the car is really a 250 and not a 5, because I just put 2 because I think from my experience and what we've worked out there is that more often or not there's couples, but occasionally you get a carload full of people. So I think you could argue that a passenger car holds 4 people, so that's really a 250 rate. The hard fact is I ran a model with a $5 car fee, and we're going to lose our butt on that deal.
Okay. What about
Can't do that.
$750?
Pardon?
$750.
$10 is a kind of a, I can run the numbers, but
Well, I was just curious.
yeah, I tried a lot of different scenarios, and I kept coming back to the $10 as kind of a base that you've got to have. Now, it's the highest percentage of visitation that we have. We have high numbers of single passenger cars.
80%. We estimated 80%.
70, yeah, almost 80%. Oh, well, there's only 3.5% commercial vehicles from what Public Works provided us. So if we drop below that $10 threshold, we're really going to have a hard time to recapture our investment.
Yeah, I was surprised when I looked at the numbers as well. We had some meetings, as they mentioned earlier, on this, and just a tiny tweak really made a huge difference when you push it out 7 to 10 years on whether the city makes money or loses money.
Okay.
And I mean, I'll just say that I think we worked really hard to make sure we were capturing everything, all the way down to depreciation, because moving forward things have to be repaired, and we wanted to be sure that we put everything conceivable in there. So there's a lot of costs that have been built into this model, all the way down to capturing some public safety time out there and so forth that we have, to make sure we're not losing money without knowing it. But that being said, that drove the $10 price to where that's kind of where we started seeing black versus red.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. I do appreciate it.
Like I said, I did have a conversation with a tour operator that does operate the mini vans, and although I think that they said they could live with the $50, they were more inclined to the $35 is what they were, hoping that, and well, I guess if you're assuming that $250 is the per person fee, and there's 4 people a car, that $50 is pretty stiff for a 10-passenger van.
Yeah, I actually like option 2, since we're adding a fee that's never been there before. We might start a little easy on it, on the public.
The thing that they do too, I mean, we have to be careful. This is like, pricing your goods. If you go too high, they won't buy it. Tours, particularly the boutique tours, seem to, I think, bring a little bit more to the table than the 40-passenger van. The 40-passenger bus, although some do overnight here, which is a great thing, many of them come in, drop, go, and they're gone. So we see very little. And one of the things that the architect pointed out on our review of the visitor contact station, it's not necessarily how many people a year you have come, it's how many at one time. And so when you look at what has the most detrimental impact to the facility in terms of how we design our restrooms and our number of bathrooms, a number of toilets and stuff, it's when 3 buses hit there and there's 40 people in a bus, that's 120 people all at once. Whereas the passenger cars, you know, they just kind of float in and float out on a steady stream. So really, to offer a steep discount for a 40-passenger bus that's having the most impact on your trail, on your restrooms, on your facilities, you know, I don't know whether that makes a lot of sense. To be honest with you, I'd look at either option three, where you're getting, you know, more of a stable return. Actually, number three has it's more in line if you consider that the passenger car is a 4-passenger car, so that's $250. That's the most equitable one of all of them, I think, in terms of trying to recapture your cost.
Yeah, I was going to agree with the impact on the facility from the trails to toilets. The buses have severe impact, and you know, so I'm in favor of some charge for that. You know, my feeling is if you're flying in from overseas and you're coming to Page for a day, you know, Horseshoe Bend is one of the signature things that people are going to want to see, along with Antelope Canyon and, you know, maybe the lake. But I cannot picture someone making an overseas trip and $3 or $5 changing whether they're going to see one of the key features or not. I can't picture that. I can't imagine that pricing that out of the realm, so to speak. From a business standpoint, I think it's totally reasonable. Either option 3 or 4, I think they're both reasonable for what we're offering.
I would go with 3 before I would go with 4, because when the tour people set out here a few months ago, we asked them to spread the word that we were going to charge $100 a bus, and now you're going to tell them to double that? I don't think that's very kosher. 3 I could live with, but 4, no.
I think 3 provides equity, particularly, you know, when we bring out the fact that you know, if we're figuring $250 for a passenger car, it just is. It's a stable base, you know. So, you know, I think we can make the numbers work with that revenue stream. We've tried to be somewhat conservative, but not to the extent where we're padding this thing. I mean, you know, we're trying to be real with expenses, as Mark said. We do capture depreciation, but we're trying to be as look at this as what would this look like today if we were going to open this business? Well, we are going to open this business, but what's it really going to look like? You know, and taking the impact to the finance department, we've recaptured costs there because they're going to have a staff person that's going to have to be devoted to, you know, cash management and accounting and so forth. We did recapture a little bit of money for EMS and public safety because that is a heavy demand for them, particularly in the summer months. So, you know, it's anybody's guess what the future looks like, but it's our best guess at what we know from having data from the traffic counts and looking at. Linda put together a really great personnel fee schedule that identifies every position that we need, and it's got job descriptions attached to them, benefits. So the personnel segment of this forecast model is really close. I believe it's exactly what we're going to basically start out with needing, and then the rest is basically looking at, you know, what do you think supplies would cost? What do you think this would cost? And so
I think moving out too, if you consider right now, you know, we have traffic counts that take into account the issues we have at Horseshoe Bend, the limiting we have. We've had to turn people away all season because of the limits of our parking lot. And once we build that out and make the facility, you know, we have hard bathrooms and more parking, and that turning away tends to minimize that, along with when the word gets out that, you know, this is now a nicer facility. I don't think we're going to see a hit in traffic count. I really think we're probably going to see an increase in traffic count. You know, much like South Rim saw when they built out their parking lots and did buses back and forth. We thought that was a horrible idea, but their traffic counts just kept climbing after they put that infrastructure in. So I think you're conservative, and I think maybe in a few years we'll have to come back and revisit the fees. But right now, our focus has to be sure that we're not going in the red on this. And I think you have a good approach here.
So I just have a question on like walk-ins. Would they just be considered as a per person basis?
We talked to the park about the difference between how we could do this a couple of years back, and they didn't. They basically said to try and capture a per person is virtually impossible. To sit there and try to count how many people are in the van, or how many people are in the bus, or how many people are in the
I
car.
think she's saying if someone walks in.
If somebody walks in, like if
Oh,
somebody
well, if they
Ubers
walk
there,
in,
it's-
good for them. Let them get in free. I don't care, because that's about a mile from the road to the
Well, no,
fee
'cause
station in the first
What
place.
I'm saying is there's like taxis and Ubers, and now there's Lyfts in town, so people can like drive a person out there.
I
and
assume
then
it'd be
drop
a
them off.
motorcycle. It's a $5 charge, I would assume. If you walk in, it's a $5 charge.
And then like a minivan can hold like what, 8 people?
$10.
Okay, so they would be considered as the
Passenger.
Same as a motorhome.
It's a passenger, not, yeah.
It's just like we talked about, Kristen, when when you look at the plan for the fee structure, you drive in, you go way around the corner, and now you're at the point where, okay, I got to pay, right? What if you don't want to pay? What if you say, well, I didn't know it was going to be $10. I'm going to go ahead and go on down to Antelope. What's the alternative? And we talked in great length of it. Levi brought that up in one of the design meetings. We go, you know what? That's probably 1% out of 99%. So if that's the case, go out the way you came in, and maybe you give away a free visit. But it's
Mayor, I
not
move
worth
to authorize staff to publish proposed fees for Horseshoe Bend using option 3.
a second.
Motion is second. I'll take a quick comment from the audience.
So I'd like to kind
Sorry,
of,
name and address, please.
Dave Doyle, 933 South Napa. All right, so things I'd like to know is, one, you're looking at a projected in the black in 7 years, 10 years? Is that correct? Okay. So, and you're also saying that how many people from Page actually go out there? How many locals are going out to see this? I mean, if this is not that many, why does that matter? Number two, and that changes with each of these price lists. If you can charge less, then why not do that? Secondly, you've got Navajo Nation right there. Any one of them can open a parking lot, and then everybody can walk in, as you're saying, for free. The other thing is where does the funds go once we do get into the black? How much of this, you repay the general fund, great, but at what point do you actually get to use that money? You don't. It only gets used for Horseshoe Bend. So why are we trying to gouge people, stock up the funds for something that we've already fronted the money for, that's only going to need a little maintenance, for something that honestly we could go out there with some gravel, resurface it, spend what, $7,500K to maintain as it is now, before the construction that's all taking place. So I'm trying to figure out where this fee schedule is, appropriate.
Want me to
Thank you.
comment on that?
Take a stab at it.
Want to comment?
No, we have a, thank you. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any more discussion from council? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. New business, item number 1, discussion possible action pertaining to comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year 2018. Linda.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Each year, the City of Page undergoes an annual audit of its financial records. The goal of the independent audit is to provide reasonable assurance that the city's financial statements are free of material misstatement. This year, we had Hinton Burdick PLLC. They have completed this task and would like to present the city's annual financial audit to the council. We have McKay Hall here, the audit manager from Hinton Burdick, and I'm going to turn it over to him to go through that presentation.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here this evening. We're grateful for the opportunity that we've had to work with the city. As Linda said, I am an audit manager with Hinton Burdick, the LLC, new firm. And this evening I'll talk a little bit about the results of the financial audits, the opinions that we've issued in the reports. We'll touch on some of the financial highlights from the city's financial statements, and then we'll look at some 5-year trends for some of the financial indicators within the major funds and for the city. So I do get going sometimes. If at any point in time you have any questions, please feel free to speak up, let me know, and we'll address those as we go through. Would also, as I get started, like to express our appreciation for your staff here at the city. We know that even under the best of circumstances, an audit is a bit of an interruption. Staff have been really great to work with, and we appreciate that. I think it's also worth noting that your CAFR has a certificate, an award from the GFOA, the Governmental Finance Officer Association, for the quality of the CAFR that the city has. I think that your staff should be commended for that. I think it's also worth noting that your staff also put in and received an award for their budgetary activities for fiscal year 18 as well. So they're putting forth great effort, and I think that they should be commended for it, and they have some great results doing there. As was said, we go through, and on a test basis, we sample, we test, we confirm amounts, the city's activity, and then we issue an opinion on whether or not that information appears to be materially correct, which is to say that the person using the financial statements can rely upon that information for their decisions when using the financial statements. If there was an amount in there that, if it changed, would cause the typical user of the financial statements to change their opinion, that would be a material misstatement. Based upon our test work, we are happy to note that there are no material misstatements with financial statements, that they are materially and reasonably correct in their statement. And that is on pages 1 through 3, our financial audit report. And we're happy to say that we're issuing an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. As a local government, there's also what's called a Yellow Book report, where we go through. The main focus of the financial audit is not to go through and test the internal controls of the city, but in the course of the financial audit, we do take a look at the internal controls. And if we see that there's a material weakness or a significant deficiency, which is to say that if there was a high likelihood that a material misstatement would be processed through the city's financial system without being caught in the normal course of operations, normal course of business, that would be a material weakness or a significant deficiency. And this Yellow Book report, the report on compliance and on internal controls over financial reporting, on pages 131 and 132 of the bound financial statements, is where we issue our opinion on that. And we're happy to say that we found nothing that was a material weakness or a significant deficiency in the course of our test work. So that was all looking good there. There's also a state compliance report. We test the city's compliance with certain state requirements. We're happy to say that there were no issues noted there either. It's also a clean opinion. And that report is on page 133. Some of the highlights from fiscal year 18, the total net assets of the city were $144 million as of June 30th, 2018. The information's there on page 16 of the bound financial statements. That's an increase of $7.6 million from the prior year, with $5 million of that being in the governmental activities and the remainder in the business type activities. That's an important number in that the net position is an indicator over time. The main purpose of the city is not to earn money, to have profits, But you do have to have resources in order to meet your obligations and in order to meet any unexpected issues that arise. And so this net position is the pool of resources that you have in order to meet those responsibilities or any unexpected issues that come up. So over time, the increase or the decrease of that net position is an indicator of the health of the city. If it's increasing, that's generally a good indicator. If over time it decreases year after year, that's an indication that you're going to have issues. Capital assets are important in that you need to have your capital assets to meet the responsibilities of the city. The governmental capital assets increased this year by 1.1 million, and that's after being netted against depreciation of 2.1 million. It's an important figure because if over time your additions do not meet or exceed your depreciation, your infrastructure is going to age out and you're going to run into problems. So any given year it can be above or below, that's not really a big issue, but over time you do want to watch and make sure that your capital asset additions are more than the depreciation. We've also gone through and listed out the significant additions this year, the largest additions of the city for the governmental activities there. The business type activities, capital asset additions for the year were $223,000, and that was after being netted against the depreciation of the 2.2 million. So once again, the additions were a little above the depreciation. That's good. And then there's a list there of the significant business type additions for the year. Long-term debt is also a key indicator, something that you want to watch over time. The total governmental long-term liabilities are $18.3 million as of June 30th, 2018. Of that $18.3 million, $8.8 million is related to pension and other post-employment benefits. We've talked the last couple of years about GASB 68 and the net pension liability. The short of that is that the state retirement plan gets apportioned out, as it were, and the liability gets reported by all of the governmental entities in the state that are part of the plan. And so Page's pension liability is coming from that. That was a GASB 68 Governmental Accounting Standards Board requirement that took effect back in fiscal year 15. It seemed to go over so well that they implemented GASB 75, which is quite similar. It took effect this year, but it's related to other post-employment benefits. If there are any questions there, I'd be happy to talk about it, but it's very
Where's
exciting.
that 8.8 million broken out on the CAFR in terms of the different pension segments?
If you take a look at page 48, it gets broken out between the governmental and the business type. The business type funds are much like for-profit, and so they use full accrual accounting. And so you can actually follow that net pension liability through to the balance sheet for each of those. The governmental funds use modified accrual accounting, and they don't really track on a fund level long-term liabilities or assets, and so they're not broken out here. If you needed that information, you could always talk to your finance department and see how it might allocate out to the different funds, but it's not actually included within the statements themselves, beyond that governmental accounting, the governmental funds grouping there. Also, that gives you the summary of the information there on page 48. If you take a look, the long-term liabilities of the governmental funds decreased by $1 million, and that's the result of the regularly scheduled annual debt service payments, as well as the actuarial determined changes for the net pension and OPEB liabilities. The total business type long-term liabilities are $3.5 million, also there on page 48. As you take a look, though, you'll see that 3.5, of that 3.5, 3.1 is related to the net pension and to the OPEB liabilities. All in all, the business type long-term debt decreased, long-term liabilities decreased by $29,000. This is the GASB 68 and 75 that we were talking about. And as much as I like spending time on that, I don't know as I'll go spend a whole lot more time, other than it does kind of give you a breakout between the governmental, the proprietary funds. There is a net pension and OPEB asset recognized as well, which is to say that as the plan has resources that can be used to settle that liability in future years, that also gets split up and allocated out to the governmental entities, and at those times you'll have a net pension asset as well. So you can end up with a net pension asset and liability. The actual resources received in the general fund, so the performance of the general fund, there were 1.9 million more than was budgeted. On page 84, it gives the budget to actual breakout. The excess was due mainly to the 2.5 million in the city sales tax being in excess of what was budgeted. Also, the actual expenditures for the general fund came in less than the budgeted amount, which is good. Nearly half of that difference had to do with the general services, human resources, and the fire department. Those expenses came in under budget. The 5-year analysis, if we take a look at that, this gives you the total assets, the total liabilities, and the net position, or the equity fund balance for the general fund. So we said its purpose is not to make money per se, but you do have to have those resources. And so over time, you'd like to see an upward trend in the assets and in the fund balance for the general fund in order to gather those resources together. As you recall, a few years back, about 10 years ago, there was a big hiccup. Everybody got hit bad that year. If you don't have any resources to speak of, that can leave you in a real pinch at those times. If you do have a bit of a resource pool together, then that allows you to weather those times in much better circumstances and be able to continue to provide the services. This is a cash trend for the general fund. It's a strong trend. It's a northeasterly trend on the graph. It's trending up, which is good. That's tied directly to that assets, liabilities, and that position graph that we were looking at as well. This is a quick rundown of your expenditures in the general fund, broken out by category. If you take a look, you will see that there has been an increase from the prior year, with the biggest increases being in the human resources, in public safety. But that was expected with the budget, and as was stated, your actual expenditures in those areas came in under budget. So while there was an increase in expenditures this year, there was also a significant increase in the revenues, leaving your general fund in a pretty strong position by the end of the fiscal year. Breaking out a couple of the revenues within the general fund, as you take a look at the sales tax, you'll see that over the last 5 years, it's also been an upward trend, which is good, providing the resources for the city. The other tax revenues, if you take a look, you'll see that they have also been an upward trend in general, though it's not been as sharp a trend as the sales tax. Taking a look at the change, the percentage change in your sales tax revenue versus your total tax revenue, you can see they've all been trending upward over the last 5 years, but your sales tax, as we saw with the earlier graphs, have been trending up at a faster rate than your other taxes. Your HERF fund, your highway user fund, as a major fund, take a look at this. It gives you your total revenues, your total expenditures. Over time, they should be breaking even. This actually is a fairly typical trend for the HERF fund. You'll end up building resources within that fund in some years, and then you'll have road projects, which generally are high-ticket items, and so you'll see some peaks and valleys over time as the revenues exceed expenditures one year, and then the expenditures will exceed the revenues in some other years. So that's a fairly typical trend that we see there. The cash within the fund can be a little easier indicator to follow sometimes. As you can see, there has been, over the last 5 years, some growth in the cash within that fund in order to pay for the projects. There have been some ups and downs just depending on which projects were implemented and what the fees for those projects were in those years. Debt service fund, collecting cash to settle the debt there. That's an upward trend there, which means that you should be in pretty good shape to settle your debt as required on those schedules. The capital project fund, to build up projects to build up funds and resources for other projects besides possibly including road work up and down. This capital project fund trend here, once again, is fairly typical. Much like the HERF fund, you'll build up the resources due to the high ticket, high price nature of capital projects. You expect to see some up and down, some differences between the revenues and expenditures. And then the capital project cash flow, as you can see, it's been building up over the last couple of years. There was a little bit of a downward trend this year, but it's fairly consistent with what it was in the last year. And that will fluctuate just depending upon what projects are being implemented. On your proprietary funds, if you take a look at the revenues and the expenditures for the utility funds, like the water fund here, these are, as I said, are much more like a for-profit business, and they are intended to have revenues to cover their costs. And they actually need to be a bit in excess of cost because you have infrastructure that's going to age out. And so your revenues need to exceed your expenses, or else you'll find yourself needing to replace infrastructure and you won't have the funding to do it. So the trend that we see here over the last 5 years, where the revenues have been in excess of the expenditures, is a good trend. That allows you to build up those resources to replace that infrastructure as is needed. And as we take a look, the cash follows the same. That increases as the revenues exceed expenses. The sewer fund, a similar trend. There was a bit of a closing of the gap there in 2015, but there's been a bit more of a buffer put in within the last couple of years, and so that's a good trend. Some years, expenditures may be a little higher than expected, and that may close a little bit, but overall, it's a good trend for the sewer fund. Cash, once again, is following that trend. The electric fund, also there. So you can see it's got a bit of a smaller buffer there with fiscal year 14, fiscal year 15. But the revenues have consistently exceeded the expenditures, which is good. And again, the cash has followed that same general trend over the last 5 years. And then taking a look at the fund balances and net position for the major funds. As of June 30th, 2018, you'll see that the darker color there is the fiscal year 18 net position and fund balance, and there's been a small increase in most of those funds, which is a good trend. All right. I know this is terribly exciting. Are there any questions that haven't been asked? If you do have some questions come up at any time, this is our contact information here. Michael Spilker is the audit partner on the engagement, and as Linda said, I'm the audit manager on it. You're welcome to contact either of us, and if this just isn't close to hand and you have a question, you're always welcome to get our contact information from Linda. She should have it really close and can get that to you at any time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mayor, I move to accept the comprehensive annual financial report for fiscal year 2018.
Second.
Motion and second. I'd just like to say we've gotten outstanding reports every year I've been on council from Linda, so kudos to your department. Any more discussion? Motion to approve. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously to accept. And that is the end of our new business. We'll move on to bid awards. 12.1, discussion and possible action pertaining to bid award number 230, lateral boring. Mr. Hill.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So, Paige, let's start with the history of this direct buried cable problem. The industry throughout the electric utility industry, it was the practice in the late 60s and early 70s, well, throughout most of the 70s, to install direct buried cable. No protection, not in any conduit. They just dug a trench, threw it in there, backfilled, and everybody's happy. The expected life of that was expected to be around 30 years. Page, looking at the growth curve for Page, guess what we got more than our share of? A lot of this direct buried cable. So this, sure enough, after about 30, 35, 40 years, we started to have chronic failures, whereas in the late 90s, we started to see this happening all the time. And in fact, in 2004-ish, we were getting 2 or 3 cable faults a week, where that would render an outage at all hours of the day, any day of the week. And in 2004, we started an aggressive project to start replacing all this cable. This is a north of $1 billion problem that just in Arizona inherited, which we got our share of. So the project that I'm bringing to you tonight is a continuation. This is kind of our work schedule that we started way back in 2004. If you look at this graph, this is Page. And if you see what's in green, that's what we've accomplished since 2004 in underground cable. If it's just white, that's overhead. We love overhead, unless you're flying balloons, but it's great for the utility. And then the yellow, notice, that's where we've done a lot of primary cable replacement, but we still need to do the laterals. That means the secondary work into people's yards up to their service entrances. The red, yet to be done. So what we're talking about tonight is this yellow area. And could I get the next one? I love this, Kane. Great job on this. This is awesome. I used to tape these up. So if you look here, for example, on this particular project, what's sketched in yellow, that's primary work we're doing. And that's not everywhere. That's just in a couple places, in 3 or 4 places. The rest of it's laterals, just going from junction boxes that are out in the roads, and secondary, basically from the transformers into yards. And that's the majority of this project. So in continuing this work, we write our own bid packages, specs, and went out for bid. What's interesting, and I think this is kind of to take note, citywide and in Page, construction costs have really climbed. And in fact, we had one mandatory pre-bid meeting. We had 2 contractors that showed up. We were very concerned of getting a qualified bid, and so we offered a second one. We had one more show up, and after advertising and closing bids, we got one bid. And that's with Niels Fugel and Sons out of Washington, Utah, and that was for that scope of work that we bid out, and that was for $497,568.08 plus tax. So we did present this to the board at the December 11th meeting, and the board recommended unanimously to the council to award this to Niels Fugel and continue this effort. This is budgeted in our capital budget. Like what we do in the utility, we track our depreciation, and we attempt, just as you saw in the budget discussion or the presentation, we attempt to make capital improvements to the utilities that equal to the depreciation. In other words, we try to keep up with that. Some years it's a little more, some years it's a little bit less. So built into our rate structure, we have for capital improvements built in there to continue to replace transformers, cable, trucks, nuts and bolts, wire, etc. So this comes out of that built-in rates. That's that $500,000 that we put in that budget, in the council-approved budget. Any questions?
Actually, I have a question for you, sir. PUE has their own boring machine. Why are we putting this project out for bid?
I love that question. This is a huge undertaking. So we do have one bore machine and a 3-person crew that go out and operate that, and it's quite an art. You don't get to just buy a bore machine and start running hole. I mean, it takes quite a bit of training. When we put these out for contract, there will be as many as up to 12, possibly 15 people on this with up to 4 bore machines. Now, that won't be for the entire project, but they kind of start out slow and then they ramp up, and it's a big effort. So now, can I go back to the previous slide? Where you have red areas here, there's places where we have done work. So in the utility, what we've adopted is like a quote 3-strike rule. So if we have a section of underground primary that faults 3 times, we don't just go out there, we'll fix it 3 times and we say, well, we got to make that a priority to replace that. So there's places like, if you look at this yellow area down here in the ranchettes down Morgan Road, and I forget the name of that road, I should know it. But our crew replaced all that primary. Also, our crew replaced 1 or 2 sections of primary up here in this yellow in the current project that we're doing. Remember, not all primary is being redone. So at some point, we hit 3 strikes. We sent our crew out there to do those 3 strikes. And then there's some of that that's been done here in these red areas. They go out and they'll bore in a lateral that fails. So they're out there running around chasing these things as they pop up to address. The contracted projects are more to take care of this massive problem we have with the underground cable.
Just for general curiosity and those in the audience who may be wondering, this project is set for to end in June, correct? Once it begins. To give an idea as to if PUE did it, how long would it take?
3 to 5 years if we left them on it full time.
Thank you. I do appreciate it.
That, and I want to add something to that. All the contractor is doing is installing conduit, just drilling in conduit, working with the yard owners, people on the street. Then our crews go in and pull in the wire and make determinations and do the cutover.
Mr. Mayor, I move to award bid number 230 to Nils Fugel and Sons Company of Washington, Utah, in the amount of $497,568.08 plus applicable taxes for lateral boring facilities upgrade of 12th Avenue North Phase 2.
Second. One quick question, Brian. When you have a bid, how does this number compare to what we were doing last year on the same scope?
Excellent question. The per unit cost went up.
I submit.
No, I'm gonna have to shoot from the hip here, but I'm gonna say in the 8 to 10% range. But notice we only got 1 bid, and we got that 1 bid because we've got a long-standing relationship with this company. They like to come over and work in Page, and they know, we let them stage in the yard. They know what to expect from us. We know what to expect from them. But construction costs are going up, and I'll point out, if you look in the general manager's report, under the electrical report, you'll see one project where there was a housing development that was going to be proposed for Greenhaven, and it was basically, and we all know how bad we need housing, but it was going to be 16 fourplexes, and they pulled investors together and pulled construction numbers together and saw what they could do in the market. No problem with renting them, but the construction costs were too high, is what they said. So the investors, the bigger investors, walked. So to me, that's significant in what's going on.
Any further discussion? All in favor to award the bid? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Next agenda item with business on it is number 16, business from the council, executive session, property located on Scenic View Drive.
You want to go into that now?
I would like to go into that now.
Going now or?
we go into executive session.
Can we maybe just tie up the rest of the agenda? A couple of things left.
So board, so what's left on there? If we move the executive session to the end, boards and commissions. Are there any reports? So I sent out email with our new liaisons. We'll have to get with the staff members to get the schedule of those meetings starting next week, starting in January. 17.2, discussion possible action amending planning commission bylaws to move their meetings to the last Thursday of the month and give them flexibility to move their meetings to avoid conflict and holidays.
Mayor, members of the council, this evening, originally Jerry Stabley was going to present to you, but Jerry had to take a quick leave. His stepfather had passed away. In lieu of that, though, we also had our new community development director, Tim Swan, Monday, and Tim has been hitting the ground running. He comes by way of Maricopa County, Buckeye area, Surprise, Gila Bend, Phoenix. Tim's been around a little bit. He's a veteran and highly qualified for this position. And I'll defer this agenda item to Tim.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Tim Swan, Community Development Director. Thank you, and I appreciate the warm welcome that the staff has had, and meeting many of you all here. I very much appreciate the warm welcome and your encouragement and forward thinking. It makes my job and it makes our job a lot easier and really fosters success within all the departments, and I can't express that more. So upon discussion and really taking a look at a stance, and you saw the growth trends that we do have, and to foster that development, we want to become more nimble, and that's where community development, permitting, planning and zoning things, we really need to take a comprehensive look at our situation and to how to foster growth. And you heard earlier on that mobilization and construction, there's some difficulties there just in logistics. So it's my philosophy to do everything that we can to ensure we are development friendly. And what's up for discussion today is moving our Planning and Zoning Commission to a more amicable time with the option to move it around when we have priority projects that need to move forward. And that's speaking with the commission members. It's in agreements, and they give their recommendation as well.
I move to approve the amendments to the Planning and Zoning Commission bylaws, change their meetings to the last Thursday of the month, and give them the flexibility to move their meetings to avoid conflicts and holidays.
Right.
Motion is second, and this was also recommended unanimously by the Planning and Zoning. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Tim. 17.3, discussion City Council pertaining to Page Public Safety Personnel Retirement Safety Board. So Gary Yantis has resigned from the Public Safety Personnel Board, and we talked him into coming back for another meeting so that we would have a quorum. So we need to appoint him. Bring him back to that board.
His term ended on June 30th. Need to reappoint him so.
Appointing the chair, okay, you're right. This one's first, and then the chair would be, human resources.
So he has agreed if we appoint him to come back there would be a quorum for the end of this year. If someone would like to make a motion to appoint him. I'll make the motion to appoint Gary Yantis to the Page Public Safety Personnel System Retirement, Police Board and Fire for a term ending June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item, 17.4, discussion of possible action pertaining to the chair for the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System Board. So there also has to be a chair appointed by council, and instead of appointing a person, it was suggested that we appoint a position, and the staff's recommendation is the position of Human Resource Director.
Move to appoint Human Resource Director Administrator as the chair for the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System Board.
Second.
Motion multiple seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We have no further business under departments or claims. We'll move to that executive session with a motion.
We go to executive session.
Second.
Motion and second to enter executive session pursuant ARS 38431.03A7, properly located on Scenic View Drive. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. When we return back to the dais, there'll be no further business from council, but please feel free to stick around.